Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful princess in a big castle. One day, her father the king gave her a golden ball as a birthday present.
Happy birthday, my daughter.
Thank you, father. The princess loved this golden ball. She started to spend all her time playing with it in the garden. One day, she went out with her ball and started to play with it, tossing it around. The princess came next to a little pond and kept on playing with the ball. Right at that moment, she could not catch the ball after she tossed it in the air, and the ball started to roll away. My ball! The princess ran after her golden ball, but the ball got faster and faster. Finally, the ball fell in the pond and sank into the deep waters. Oh no! The princess sat down next to the pond and desperately started to cry. My beautiful golden ball! How am I going to bring it back? Suddenly, she heard a voice.
Ribbit, my beautiful princess, why are you crying? Ribbit.
She looked around but could not figure out where the voice was coming from. When she looked closely, she realized that the voice was coming from the frog that was right next to the pond, looking at her. The frog leaped towards the princess and asked again after he got closer.
What's wrong, my beautiful princess? Why are you crying?
The princess got stunned when she saw a talking frog. A talking frog? How can that be?
Well, here I am, talking, beautiful princess. Now tell me, why are you crying?
Coming back to herself, the princess started to tell her story. The golden ball that my father gave me fell in the pond. It's already at the bottom. How am I going to get it back? The frog came next to her feet and made an offer.
My beautiful princess, I will bring back your ball, but in return I will need you to do me a favor.
The princess was curious. So what's the favor?
If you accept to be friends with me, I would like to live with you in the castle.
The princess thought about it and then accepted his offer. So the frog jumped in the water and went out of sight. A while later, he appeared with the golden ball and threw it to the princess. Reunited with her ball, the princess happily started to walk back to the castle. Seeing the princess leaving the frog behind, Frog yelled after her.
My beautiful princess, you forgot me. You promised to take me with you to the castle. Ribbit.
The princess yelled out from afar, laughing. How can an ugly frog like you even imagine to live with a beautiful princess like me?
Ribbit.
The princess left the frog right there and went back to her castle. In the evening, the king, queen, and the princess sat down at the dinner table. Right when they were starting to eat, they heard a knock on the door. The maid told them that a frog had arrived and told them that he was invited by the princess and asked permission to come in. The king, surprised, asked his daughter.
Would you like to tell us what's going on, my daughter?
Well, Daddy. The princess told all about what happened that morning at the pond.
If you gave a promise to the frog to save your ball, then you must keep your word for it.
The king ordered the maid to welcome the frog inside. A while later, the door opened and the little frog came in leaping and stopped next to the dinner table.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, my king, for allowing me in.
With one big jump, the frog landed next to the princess's plate. He looked at her, unhappy. The king ordered a plate for the frog, but the frog stopped him.
No need for a plate. I can eat from the princess's plate.
The frog started to eat from her plate. The princess was really upset with him, but she thought that he would leave after the dinner anyway, and didn't say anything. But the frog had no intentions to leave after the dinner. When she left the table, he followed the princess to her room. Time passed and the frog got sleepy.
My princess, I'm really sleepy. I'd like to sleep in your bed if you don't mind.
Afraid to upset her father, the princess had to say yes to that too. The frog jumped on her bed and put his head on her soft pillow. Trying not to show her anger, the princess laid next to the frog and slept. In the morning, the frog woke the princess up.
Good morning, my beautiful princess. I have one more wish from you. If you do that, I will leave right away.
Hearing that the ugly frog would leave soon, without making it obvious, the princess was extremely happy. All right, shoot. What is it now?
I want you to kiss me, my princess.
The princess jumped out of her bed furiously. How dare you! That is impossible! The smile on the frog's face disappeared, and instead a teardrop ran down his cheek. The princess thought for a while. Oh well, what's the big deal with one tiny kiss? Evidently, I won't see him ever again. And so she gave him a kiss. As soon as she kissed the frog, a bright white light covered the room. Due to the light, the princess couldn't see anything. After a short while, the light disappeared. The princess started to see again, but this time she could not believe her eyes. Right where the frog was standing a moment ago, there was a very handsome man instead. The princess was stunned with what she was seeing. She couldn't believe her eyes, and so she asked, "Who are you? What happened to the frog standing here?"
My beautiful princess, I am the prince of a land far away. The evil witch cast a spell on me and turned me into a frog. To break the spell, I had to spend one night next to a princess and get a kiss from her. Thanks to you, I am safe from being a frog forever.
The princess was very surprised, but also very happy with what she heard. They both went next to the king and told him all about it.
This should be the second lesson the frog has taught you, my dear daughter. We should not evaluate anyone by only their looks and judge without knowing the whole truth about them.
The king hosted the prince for a few more days in his castle. The prince and the princess came next to the pond where they first met.
My princess, will you marry me and come with me to my kingdom?
The princess smiled and nodded, accepting the prince's offer. And right at that moment, a sound broke the silence.
Ribbit, ribbit.
They turned and looked where the sound came from. There was a frog next to the pond, looking at them. They held their breath and waited for him to talk. But it didn't happen. They both started laughing.
Don't worry, little froggy. I'm sure you too will find your princess one day.
And laughed a little more. After a short while, they got married and lived happily ever after. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Heidi. Due to the loss of her parents, her auntie was taking care of her. But one day, she took Heidi to her grandfather's little hut in the mountains. Grandfather Alm was a grumpy old man who lived in a small hut on the Alps. This was the first time that Heidi saw her grandfather. Telling him that she had found a job in another city, Heidi's aunt left Heidi with her grandfather and returned to the city. Grandfather Alm, who was used to living an isolated life away from people, was actually glad that his granddaughter was there, but did not show it to Heidi. The old man prepared a nice cozy bed in the attic. Heidi loved her grandfather from the first sight, and happy times were about to begin for her in the mountains. When she woke up in the morning, she was introduced to her grandfather's very big dog, Joseph. Heidi loved Joseph. Then one day, when she was hiking on the hills, she met Peter the shepherd, who was grazing his goats on the meadows.
I haven't seen you around here before.
Yes, I just arrived. I'm going to live here with my grandfather from now on.
In the following days, Peter started to take Heidi with him to graze his goats in the meadows. They started to hike together in the mountains. Everything was so new and exciting for Heidi. She learnt a lot from Peter about how to be a shepherd. Even though he didn't show it much, Grandfather Elm loved Heidi very much. Running around and having fun on the fields all day long, Heidi was very happy, but she also never forgot to help her grandfather with the housework. And one of her favourites was to bake little bread in her grandfather's wood oven. She used to take the bread she made to Peter's grandmother, and Peter's grandmother would give her fresh goat's milk in return. One day, summer was over and it was winter time. When Peter started to go to school, Heidi was left alone and eventually got bored. She was really upset that she was too small to go to school like Peter. One day, Heidi's aunt came back to take Heidi to the city. She was going to get homeschooling and work. Grandfather Elm was very upset at first and did not accept it, but when he thought about it, he realised that it would be best for Heidi to stay in the city and learn to read and write.
Here, I love my grandfather,
fussed Heidi. But she was convinced to go after her aunt promised her that she would be back on the mountains after a short while. Her aunt and Heidi arrived to a big mansion after a long train ride.
Wow! What a big house! I'm going to stay here?
Heidi met Clara, the little girl in the house. Clara could not walk because of an accident she had when she was a little child. Her aunt actually brought Heidi to this house to keep Clara company. Clara and Heidi got along really well and became best of friends. Not knowing much about the urban life, Heidi was making Clara laugh with her silly mistakes. Clara's grandmother was a very tough and strict lady.
Get up, you lazy girl. It's time to study. You still have a lot to learn.
Clara's grandmother was trying to teach Heidi a lot, from how to sit and stand up properly and how to use a knife and fork at the dinner table. And Heidi was even dressing like the ones who live in the city. But she wasn't feeling very comfortable in these dresses. Clara also helped Heidi to learn to read and write. Heidi did like being here with Clara and all, but she missed the mountains and her grandfather far too much. Heidi could not even eat because of her sadness. Her heart was full of longing. Clara's father and grandmother realised Heidi's sadness. After a while, they decided to send her next to her grandfather. But Clara was very sad because Heidi was leaving.
To truly love someone means to want their happiness at all costs,
said grandmother. At last it was time to say goodbye. While Heidi was leaving, her aunt told her that Clara was going to come and visit her in the mountains next year. Happy to be back in the mountains, she first stopped by Peter's house on her way home and gave the bread Clara sent to Peter's grandmother. Leaving her fancy dress behind, she went running home and hugged her grandfather as tight as she could. And they were happy again. A while later, Heidi was high in the clouds with happiness because of the letter she received saying that Clara was going to visit her soon. When in the Alps, Clara liked Peter a lot, but Peter was a bit hesitant because he was afraid that Heidi was going to go back to the city with Clara. Clara, Peter and Heidi were having the time of their lives on the hills. The fresh mountain air and natural foods were really good for Clara. But Peter started to get really jealous of Heidi because of her close friendship with Clara. Peter also did not like to carry Clara to her wheelchair and push her around. One day, he pushed Clara's wheelchair off from a cliff. He thought that this would solve everything. Without her wheelchair and the fresh mountain air, Clara became much stronger, and she even started to walk slowly with Heidi's help. After a while, she started to take steps with no one's help.
I can walk! Yay, Heidi! I owe this to you.
One day, Clara's father and grandmother came to visit, and when they saw Clara walking, they couldn't believe their eyes. They gave their thanks to Grandfather Alm and Heidi. At that moment, Peter felt really sorry about what he had done. He confessed to pushing Clara's wheelchair off the cliff.
I apologize to all of you. What I did was so very wrong.
We forgive you, right, Clara? Even though what you did was wrong, we are all happy that she's walking now.
They all laughed with joy. Clara and her family promised to come back next summer, and they all lived happily ever after.